Welcome back. And let's now implement the architecture that we just discussed in the previous lecture. And so let's start by implementing that app class that I just showed you previously. And actually, I also have this architecture diagram right here, and it is this one called part 1. And so as you see, this is exactly what we just discussed before. And so I will now go ahead and start to implement this class here and all of these methods. All right. So class app, and then we need the constructor, which for now I'm going to leave empty here. Then we need get position. Next, we need load map. Let's take a look at what's next here. Then we have show form, toggle elevation field, and new workout. So show form, toggle elevation field, and finally, new workout. Okay, and so now we have this structure where we can put our code that we already have. So let's start with this one here. So getting the user's current position using geolocation. And so I'm going to start by taking all of this code here. So it ends here, I believe. Yeah, that's the one. Cut it and put it here into get position. But now I actually want to refactor this a little bit better, because I think it's still a bit messy to have this callback function here of the get current position function right here. Okay, and so this function here, so this callback of get current position is going to become the load map. Okay, because that is exactly what we do here in this function. So let's cut this here and put it here in load map. And actually, of course, we don't need this function keyword here because we already called it load map, right? So let's just copy the parameter name here and put it here, and then get rid of these. Okay. And so now here as the first callback function, which is the one for success. So actually here, we need to call load map. And so since we're now in a class, we need to say this dot load map. And so JavaScript will then call this callback function here and pass in the position argument as soon as the current position of the user is determined. All right. And so that event that I just mentioned is basically this receive position. And as I said, it is not an event in the common sense that we used before. So one that we hand using add event listener, but we can still think of this as an event. All right. And so basically on that event, the this.loadMap method is called. Now here we have some other code. So two event listeners, but for now, let's actually make this code here work. Because right now, of course, none of this will do anything to our application, will it? And why is that? Well, it is because, first of all, we need to create an actual object out of this class. Okay? So right now, this is all just a plan. So like the blueprint of a house, but it is not the actual house yet. And so that analogy is sometimes very helpful. So in this case, this is just the theoretical plan of our application, but it's not a real object yet. And so let's create that down here. And so I will again call this app, but lowercase. And so this app will be new app like this. And this application actually doesn't need any arguments. And so here in the constructor, we don't have any parameters in this method, okay? Because right now we don't need any inputs into our application. If we need it, then we could add that here to the constructor, but in this case, that's just not necessary. One example that we could use for inputs in an application like this would be, for example, an object of options, which is pretty common in third-party libraries. So if we were building a library for some other people to use, then we could allow these developers to customize the library using some options. But again, that's just not necessary in this case. All right. Now, in order to actually trigger the geolocation API, this method here needs to be called, right? But right now, that is not happening. So how can we do that? We could do this, right? So app.getPosition. And so then this code here would get executed right at the point where the application loads. And that's because, as we already know, all the code that is here in the top level scope, so out here outside of any function, will get executed immediately as the script loads. All right. And so right in the beginning, this new app variable here is created out of the class. And then right now, immediately afterwards, we would get the position of the user. However, why should we do this out here if we could simply do it inside of the class? That would actually be a lot cleaner. So inside of the class, we also have a method that automatically gets called as the page loads. So let's think how we could do this instead. So inside of the app class, we also have a method that gets executed as soon as this app here is created, right? And that is the constructor method. Remember? So this constructor method is called immediately when a new object is created from this class. And this object that is created, so this app object, is created right in the beginning when the page loads. And so that means that the constructor is also executed immediately as the page loads. And so what we can do is to simply get the position in the constructor. And so here all we have to do is to change it to the this keyword, so to the current object, and that's actually it. So our code should actually already be working at this point. So the current position should be determined here in this method, and then the load map method should be called with that current position, right? And actually that's exactly what we also have here in our diagram. So you see the load page events will trigger the constructor, which will then trigger get position. And then as soon as we receive the position, the load map method is called with the position. Okay, and so let's see if that actually works. So here in our version, and let's just reload it manually here. And here we go. So here is our map again. So our first part of the refactoring is already working. So that's great. But now let's go back to our code here, because we still have some things to fix here. So remember that right here in the load map function, we have this global variable here called map. I mean, we don't have it here. We are simply redefining it because it is defined up here in the global scope. But now remember that we actually want everything that is related to our application, and that includes the map, right in this app class. And so therefore, we're now going to define the map and map event as properties of the object. And for that, let's actually use a private class field. So remember that works like this. And so map, and now we will not set it to anything. So just like this, and then the same for the map event. So both of them will now become private instance properties. So properties that are going to be present on all the instances created through this class. Now let's keep them here for now in order to not break the rest of the application. But now we need to fix, of course, the rest of this code. So at least this load map method, because that one relies on map, and so therefore we need to start using it now. So here we now need to actually use this.map, because again, this is now like a property that is defined on the object itself. It's no longer just a normal variable, right? And then here the same, this.map, and here also this.map. And then here we need to define the map event. And so this one we also called this.then hash map event. Now here this is just wrong. So let's fix that. And all right, that's actually it. But actually this will not yet work. But let me show you the error before I actually fix it. So let's go back here and reload this page again. And now it should not work. And so indeed we get cannot set property map of undefined. So on line 38, so that's right here. And so if the error message says that we cannot set map on the this keyword, it means that something must be wrong with the this keyword, right? So let's use our friend console.log to take a look at it. And indeed, it is undefined here. So why is that? Well, this load map method is actually called by this function here, right? So that's right here. And in fact, this is actually treated as a regular function call, not as a method call. So again, since this is a callback function, we are not calling it ourselves. It is the getCurrentPosition function that will call this callback function once that it gets the current position of the user. And when it calls this method, so this function here, then it does so as a regular function call. And as we learned before, in a regular function call, the this keyword is set to undefined. And so that's why in here, the this keyword is undefined. But fortunately for us, there is a good solution that we already know about. And that solution is to manually bind the this keyword to whatever we need. And in this case, that is simply this. So right here, this points to the current object. All right, and so that's exactly the this keyword that we also want inside of load map. And so here we explicitly say that. Okay, and remember that binds will simply return a new function. And so all of this here is still a function that JavaScript can then call whenever it needs to. So that should now work. And so if we go back here, then our map should still work as it should. And indeed, now we get the this keyword here. So we have the map and we have the map event, and we already see that our map is this big object here that is coming from the leaflet library. All right. So that was the most important thing and the biggest thing we had to refactor. But now let's quickly also talk about these two event listeners that we have down here. So the one listening for the event of submitting the form and the one of toggling the input type field. So basically that's this event here and this one. Okay. So where do you think these event listeners should be located? Do you think that they should be outside here, so outside of the class? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So instead, just like before, we actually want these event listeners, of course, to be set right at the beginning. So when a script first loads, but again, of course, that should be inside of the class. And so what is the method that automatically gets called as soon as the script loads? At least in this case. Well, again, it is the constructor. And so we are going to attach our event listeners to the DOM elements right here in the constructor. So, of course, now we want to, again, refactor this code a little bit more and take this function here out of here So basically create its own function with this code. So that's all of this, I believe. Yeah. And so where should that go? Well, it should go here into new workout. Because submitting the form for the new workout will of course create a new workout. And so that's what this method here is all about. But then here we also need the event, so we can prevent default. And then here again, we have the map event and the map. So we need the this keyword, or actually here we are just logging it to the console. So there's no need for this one. But here we need this dot map like this. All right. But now, well, let's actually analyze what's going to happen here. So first of all, of course, here we need to replace this one and actually call the new workout method, and actually not call it, but just passing it in, right? Now, keep in mind that this method here is basically an event handler function. So it's a function that's going to be called by an event listener. Now, do you remember what the this keyword looks like inside of an event listener function or of an event handler function? Well, just to make it really clear, let's take a look at it. So let's log the this keyword. All right. So again, we need to wait for the map to load. And now as I click somewhere, then you see we get some error here. So that's on line 60, cannot write private member map event. Okay, so let's go to line 60 and see what happens there. And so that's right here in this event handler function of the event listener on clicking on the map. So remember, this is basically the add event listener equivalent from the leaflet library. So we need to fix this next, but for now, let's go back to the new workout method that we were working on. And so I was trying to take a look at the this keyword here, but apparently that's not possible for now. So let's just remove it here, and I will just tell you the solution. So I was asking you, what do you think the this keyword will be like in this method now? Because this is an event handler function, and so an event handler function will always have the this keyword of the DOM element onto which it is attached. And so in this case, that's going to be the form element. So again, inside of this method here, the this keyword is going to point to form and no longer to the app object. And so once again, we need to fix that using bind. All right. And this is actually a real pain point of working with event handlers in classes like we are doing right now. So even when you're working in the real world and you have event listeners inside of a class, you will be binding the this keyword all the time, because otherwise many parts of your code are not going to work. So again, in this case, because right in this method call here, the this keyword will simply point to the form, but that's just not what we want. In most of these methods, we want the this keyword to still point to the object itself. So in this case, the app object, which is what this is currently pointing to. And so here again, we will need to use the bind keyword. And so this should now work. All right. Then we also have this one here to refactor, but actually there is another method that we want to implement, which is show form, right? And so show form is basically this code right here. So let's just cut it from here, then paste that here. All right. Now we, of course, also need this parameter here. Okay. And then here we will call this dot show form. But now if we run this code, then we will actually get the same error that we already saw the last time that we inspected our code. So the error that we saw previously when I clicked on the map. And so that's going to be this one. And so it says again that we cannot write this map event property onto this object that we are trying to currently. And so once again, the reason for that is a incorrectly set this keyword. So again, this method here is right now being used as an event handler function right here. And so just like in regular JavaScript, the this keyword in this function here will then be set to the object onto which the event handler is attached. And so that's going to be simply the map itself. Okay, and so here we are trying to write map event on the map. So again, the this keyword points to the map because this is where we attached the event handler on. And so once again, the solution to that is to bind the this keyword, because the this keyword is the app object. And so then here, this will also be the app object. And of course, that's where we have the map event property. So right here. Correct? So with that fixed, it should now work. And yeah, it does. And so now we can also test the refactoring of the form that we just did before. And indeed, we get an error. But that's no problem. That is completely normal when we are refactoring. So I'm sure we just forgot like a this keyword on line 78. So 78. Yep, that's correct. So here, of course, we need this dot map event like this. Let's give it another save and another try. And then we're actually almost done with this video. So beautiful. Now it works. And now all we need to do is to refactor this last piece of code that we have in the constructor. Because of course, we also don't want this function here to be right here in the constructor. So basically, every small piece of functionality that is in our application, we now want to be its own function. So let's take this, and for that, we have the toggle elevation field method. All right. Now this one here actually does not use the this keyword anywhere. And so here, it doesn't matter what the this keyword will be like. And so therefore, we don't have to bind it manually here because, as I just said, it doesn't really matter. Elevation field. All right. So now our constructor nicely simply gets the current position, and then it adds these two event listeners to the form and the input type element. So that's very nice and clean. Everything is neatly organized into these methods. And so I think this is a really great structure that we just created here. And now indeed, we no longer need these very ugly global variables that we relied on before. And now let's just test if this one here is working as well. And of course it is. All right. So great. We successfully implemented our architecture, at least part of it. And so now in the next lecture, we will actually implement the rest of the architecture. So that's going to be these other 3 classes here. So I hope to see you there soon.